Hello, hi, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about things in Black pop culture, but also just anything I want. It's been a while, it has. However, today I want to talk about a different topic. As a kid, I was a big fan of American Girl.
I think I know more about American Girl than you do, genius.
However, it being the early 2000s when Black doll representation was extremely scarce, I really only saw one doll in the brand that looked like me. Sure, there were Barbies and there were Polly Pockets and there was Bratz, which are a little controversial. But in the American Girl doll brand, there was really only one doll that looked like me at the time. The doll that I saw myself in was named Addie Walker, and honestly I really loved her. Not only did she have like rich brown skin, but she had hair like mine, and that was really rare at the time. I'd never seen a doll have hair exactly like I had. Most of the time the dolls that I played with, even some of the Black dolls that my mom was able to find for me, had very like straight silky hair, and there's nothing wrong with that. And besides that, she was just like a regular girl, not like a model like Barbies or Bratz. But I truly loved Addie for that reason. And yes, I did read all of the historical books that accompany the American Girl dolls. Let me grab it really quick. The other two, I have 1 through 4 with me, but the other two are at my like childhood home. I literally brought these all throughout my moves for college. Like I kept these. That's how much I loved Addie and how much of an impact she made on my life. So what's the problem? I just said like all of this amazing stuff about Addie. Doesn't seem like there's any really big scandal, is there? Well, despite being the only Black doll in the American Girl company, Addie was, well, her story, shall I say, took place in a plantation, and she was an enslaved doll. And the conversation around the time that Addie came out, and even now, is highly debated. But a couple years ago, it did really blow up on TikTok, talking about Addie. And this has been criticized and even made fun of on SNL.
And tragically, I have glasses.
That's okay. My mama's dead.
That's okay. I don't know my birthday because I'm a runaway slave.
But sometimes I think TikTok and the internet isn't exactly nuanced. Addie is now the butt of many jokes in the fandom, which I understand, but it just doesn't quite sit right with me. So today I really want to defend my girl. I'll be dissecting Addie, talking about why she was made, and we're gonna get down to the root of what she means and why I think that she's important. In order to understand Addie and who she is as a doll better, we first need to quickly talk about the American Girl doll, or rather the Pleasant Company. I'll be kind of switching between American Girl, or AG, and Pleasant Company, but they're the same thing. So the Pleasant Company, or rather the American Girl doll brand, is a majority white company. It was originally based out of Pleasant, Wisconsin, and it was founded in 1986. The company was founded by a woman named Pleasant Rowland. It was founded after Pleasant Rowland wasn't really able to find dolls for her nieces. She felt like the only options out there were Barbies or Cabbage Patch Kids, neither of which really appealed to her. Quote, she says, "On one hand, the Barbie dolls encourage girls to grow up and be adults, whereas the Cabbage Patch dolls promoted motherhood, but neither of them really focused on girlhood itself." And Miss Rowland realized that this was really a missing component from the doll market. I even feel like now, besides just the American Girl doll company, there's really not a lot of dolls that are promoting just girlhood. Like, girlhood is kind of losing a lot of its culture and a lot of its steam. Like, we don't really talk about girlhood all that much, and the age of girlhood is significantly going down. Now I would say the average age for like teenagers is like 10. And that's a little like concerning to me. Maybe I'm just getting old, but it feels weird that 10 is like the age where you're a teenager and you're suddenly grown. And I don't think that you are. So the way that Pleasant Rowland set up the company was each doll in the historical lineup came up with a book series in addition to like the physical 18-inch doll itself. So the dolls were like this big, maybe a little bit bigger, and then they came with like their own set of stories essentially, and each story kind of followed like the same pattern. Like meet so-and-so. So it would be like, meet Addie, meet Felicity, meet that. And then they would have like 6-ish books. And then they would also have like a couple like short stories and run-off things that kind of added to like the story of what your doll's character and personality is. My camera battery died, and then strangely enough, I could not find my battery to charge it, and I had to order a new one because they don't make regular ones for these. So I'm sorry, the quality is not going to be great, but I'm just going to have to keep filming on my laptop, and I hope that you still enjoy the video. There were about 3 to 4 dolls before Addie. There was Kristen, who was set in 1854, Samantha, who was set in 1904, and then Molly, who was set in 1944. Rowland states, quote, "At an age when girls are old enough to read and still love to play, they need books and dolls that capture their imaginations. The stories in the American Girl doll collection come alive with beautiful dolls and period doll clothes. The doll accessories are replicas of real things found in times gone by. They are quality pieces, not plastic playthings, and are made for children over 8 years old to treasure. Nowadays, this has significantly changed. The dolls themselves are still kind of good quality, but sadly, girls are not playing after the age of 9. And that has really changed the American Girl brand. But that's for another video, maybe I can talk about that. However, Addie as a doll was a special situation since slavery was and still is a touchy topic. While the Pleasant Company did discuss setting a doll in Harlem first before Addie, the members of the Pleasant Company felt like they couldn't really talk about other significant parts of Black American history without talking about slavery first, which kind of makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're going to talk about Black American history, enslavement is a big part of our history. It whittles down literally everything. Like, you can't talk about the Harlem Renaissance if you're not going to talk about slavery. You know, like, it's just, you kind of have to do it. In Addie's creation, the company created an advisory board, and it stated that Pleasant kind of risked her capital and her reputation, that of her company, in launching Addie as a doll. Because let's be real, any Black doll for a majority white company in the 1990s was already a risk, unfortunately. And then you add the topic of enslavement on top of that. I mean, that's a big risk. So, who is Addie and what is her story? Yes, like I said, I did pull out my old American Girl doll books, still in mint condition, just to talk about them. And I did read every single one of them, which is why they have like little page indents. So Addie Duke Walker is a 9-year-old historical character set in 1864. She was released in 1993 to American Girl doll stores nationwide, along with 6 full books in the series, and then she eventually had 5 short stories. At the start of her stories, Addie is enslaved with her family on a North Carolina plantation during the last years of the American Civil War. I'm going to talk a little bit about each book on its own, but there's a lot of context. Like, it's funny, there's only about 40 pages, 58, 59 pages in this book. And then what I do really like about all the American Girl series is at the end of the series, they also have like a little, I'm going to try to show it. They have like a historical section that talks about some of the topics that they talk about in the books in more depth. It just gives children a sense of like, oh, this is a real thing. Like, they show pictures, and it's in each and every book. And then at the end of every book, they would have this little indent where you could like write to the American Girl, and you could order, I think you could order a doll. Yeah. Oh, you could order a catalog so that you could get a doll. So book 1 has actually surprisingly a lot of context and plot, because it's the main book, right? Like, you're meeting Addie for the first time. It literally says meet Addie. So it's gonna have a lot. A little over 50 pages, and doesn't shy away from some gross depictions of slavery, but it still keeps its themes towards children learning. We as an audience learn that she loves her family, she gets distracted like any 9-year-old girl would, and she feels scared about the future. She also feels a sense of anger from what's happening to her in the hands of white people. Addie does not think it is fair or right that white people believe they are allowed to enslave and abuse Black people. She often does not like white people. She even says that she hates them. And even as she becomes less fearful of them, she does find that many of them and their actions are oppressive and racist towards her and other Black people. Now, honestly, I'm very shocked that the American Girl Company decided to put that in the book, considering that their majority audience is white. But I think that that was a smart risk to make. Now, there are lessons that she learns. Again, this is the first book where she is still enslaved. There's some, like I said, the depictions in here are really sad. One that really is like very striking. This one is just like, oh, yeah. And the main plot around this is that her father and her brother are going to be sold to another plantation, and that is a big theme because they were all supposed to escape together, but because they're sold, they're not able to. And when someone gets sold to another plantation, they don't tell you where it is, you don't know. And again, also a lot of Black people couldn't read or write, so there was no way for them to communicate. In this book, her baby sister is also left behind, and she escapes in the night with her mother. So by the time when you get to book 2, Addy has already escaped enslavement, and she is now a free girl along with her mother. So in book 2, this book does not shy away from intense topics such as colorism, social and economic class, and the right to education. This one is called Addy Learns a Lesson. One plot in the book revolves around a girl named Harriet, who is kind of like everything that Addy is not. She's kind of like her foil, essentially. And she and her family, Harriet's family, they've always been free. Harriet also has lighter skin. She's wealthy. She has beautiful, like long, like silky hair. And she and her family have access to more resources. Basically, Harriet is not like Addy's best friend named Sarah. And this kind of has to do with like Black superiority, class, and colorism. And the point of contention in the book is if Addy is willing to lose her own morals to be closer to Harriet. It's really brutal to read as a young or older viewer. And the ending is quite a beautiful testimony to friendship and love. I was kind of impressed by how open they were with these topics. Because I do believe that children experience colorism, like they experience these things at a young age, and I think that they do need media like this to tell them that they're not alone. Don't worry, Addy makes a very nice choice, but it gets a little dicey there. So then book 3, which is called Addy's Surprise, and then book 4, which is titled Happy Birthday, Addy, really kind of tackle the demolishing of the American dream. I know. I said intense. Essentially, Addy in these books is really struggling with the fact that even though her and her mother are free people, freedom still comes at a significant cost. She learns that freedom is not easy, and just because they are in the North does not mean that all white people are kind to Black people. In fact, Addy learns that they are mean, violent, and aggressive. You also get to see kind of Addy's love for herself and others, just like how generous she is. You also see her curiosity, her stubbornness, her connection to her community, and honestly, her patience. She does also get this Christmas present, which is very big, of reconnecting and finding her father. But again, as joyous as the moment of finding her father is, we as the audience are still told that not to forget that freedom is still hard for Black people, freed or not. There's also this really cute subplot where Addy has made like a friend in this older woman named Madeir. I think she's like 80 years old and she's blind, but she also has a pet bird, and she kind of teaches her to sing this freedom song. It's really cute. And again, it like really connects those themes of like connecting with your elders and like respecting people who are older. They have wise things to say, and I think that's really cute that they put that in this book. And I find that that's kind of a thread that exists in all of American Girl series, is like they're very good about still like, yes, they're children, but also like how they connect with adults in their world.
I also forgot to mention that book 4 marks the end of the Civil War, so they are all finally freed around the nation, which is a big subplot that the book 4 ends with.
Okay, and then on to book 5 and 6, which I sadly don't have. Those are the only 2 I don't have with me here in like my house, but they're back like in my childhood home, and I should have grabbed them. These books, book 5 and 6, are significantly darker. And I know what you're saying, Lene, how could it get darker? But it does. The themes of these last 2 books are about death, anger, forgiveness, growing into adulthood, memories, hope, loss, and reunion. So I just want to read a little quote from one of these books. It says, quote, "Hope is a powerful thing, Addy. It's the greatest gift you can give to somebody or give to yourself. It can see you through the worst times," end quote. Also, Harriet does eventually become friends with both Addy and Sarah. We also get the reunion of Sam, who is Addy's older brother, who he was sold to another plantation. And then within that time afterwards, he joins the Civil War and loses his arm, essentially, and then ends up coming back from the war, and he's reunited. In the last book, book 6, they're still searching for Addie's baby sister named Esther, and they're looking for her. She was being taken care of by her aunt and uncle. They're not her blood aunt and uncle, but like Esther was being taken care of by them. They were a lot older, probably in their like 70s or 80s. But in book 6, Esther is reunited with Addy along with her aunt Lula. However, their reunion is still once again met with many sorrows. Aunt Lula's husband died on the journey up to Philadelphia with Esther, and Aunt Lula doesn't live past a few days after their reunion. She still leaves Addy with these words of wisdom, quote, "There is a time for each of us to die," said Aunt Lula. "Addy, we don't all make it where we want to go in life. We start our journeys and have dreams and hopes. And sometimes other people have to carry on with them when we can't." At the end of the books, Addy does kind of get her family back, but it's not cookie cutter perfect. Like, time and trauma has aged them all. And while that's sad, I think it's beautiful that this book doesn't try to commercialize or like sanitize life and history. Like, people do die in life, and that is a common occurrence, and it doesn't make sense to like try to take that out for kids. I really think that Addy's books are a true treasure to the American Girl doll series. Not just the doll, not the money, but I think the words and the stories that the author Connie Porter put into the series. Like, I think she just breathed life into Addy. So now that we've talked a little about Addy, we must talk about the creation of Addy behind the scenes. So what was the process of creating Addy? Addy was really the first character released by the American Girl doll to have an advisory board. They basically discussed anything having to do with her history and her look. The members of this board, I think they're very important to talk about. So we have Lonnie Bunch, who later was the founding director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, and they're currently the secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. And then we've got Cheryl Chisholm, the producer and former director of the Atlanta Third World Film Festival. Spencer Crew, who is a Robinson Professor of African American History and the Public History at the George Mason University. Got Violet Harris, a researcher and expert on multicultural literature, and she specializes in Black American children's literature. And then Wilma King, who is a historian and expert on American slavery. Janet Sims Wood, who is the former librarian and scholar at the Howard University, and who specializes in stories of Black women. The board also advised on the selection of the author of the books. Reading from multiple writers, Harris recalls that they were committed to having that person be a Black American. The Pleasant Company book editor, Bobby Johnson, who joined the company in the fall of 1991, reached out to children's authors such as Mildred G. Taylor, who did Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, Joyce Hanson, who did Yellowbird and Me, and then eventually Johnson came across a New York Times review of Connie Porter's debut novel called Albright Court. They read it, and they recommended Porter to Rowan and the board. There was also someone named Polly Athen, who served as the Pleasant Company's in-house research coordinator. Athen's job was basically to make sure everything from Addie's hoop earrings down to her lace black boots were historically accurate. And the board spent more than a year kind of critiquing the prototype of dolls as well as the book manuscripts. I also want to talk about the creation of Addie's hair, since that was something that I really loved as a kid, and it seems like they put a lot of work and dedication into this. Hair for a Black doll was very important, and it would lead to kind of another fault with Addie. Some children thought that Addie's hair was beautiful, like me, but other children and parents did not. Black hair in its natural state, especially in the 90s, was not really seen as beautiful. It was kind of a reflection of something that a lot of Black people did not like. For many, it was kind of too close of a reminder of who we are. We're too much, we're too big, we're too nappy, and we need to be tamed. But Addie's hair texture especially was extremely intentional. It says that, quote, Addie's hair was perhaps the most delicate balancing act. At the time, most Black dolls, even those manufactured by Black toy companies, seemed to have long, silky locks over kinky or textured natural strands. But Addie was different. Her hair would be textured. As far as one board member was concerned, if the Pleasant Company wasn't willing to give Addie kind of that textured, wavy hair, then it would have to wade into the less child-friendly territory to explain why, quote, she can have straight hair if you want to, but then we have to deal with the rape of Black women during slavery. Ooh. So, of course, they didn't do that. In the end, Pleasant Company was still a business, and Addie was a commodity. So Chisholm said that the company also wanted to make sure little girls would be able to easily play with the doll's hair. Eventually, after some back and forth between the board, Porter, and Rowland, they agreed upon a hair type that was neither like super kinky nor bone straight, which is why Addie doesn't have like curly hair texture, but she just has like a kind of like if you would get a blowout. Still, I would say customers have frequently complained about Addie's hair in language that is, I would say it's kind of racially coded, like, oh, well, Addie's hair is difficult or challenging and not manageable, which is so funny because those are the same comments I got as a kid about my hair, so interesting. In Ashley Kirk's personal essay titled We Were American Girls, What Addie Taught Me About Black Hair, Freedom, and Myself, she talks about how difficult it was to accept Addie's hair after she had begged and saved up enough money for the doll. Even her mother stated with raised eyebrows that, quote, Addie could use a relaxer. And at the moment, many people complained about the aspect of Addie. But later down in the line, I truly believe that Addie's hair was kind of ahead of its time, and in some ways it was very revolutionary to what we see today. I also want to jump to talk about Connie Porter since I talked about the book series and since we are talking about the creation of Addie. So who is Connie Porter? Connie Porter is like the writer of the book series, and she deeply cared and still cares about the legacy of Addie to this day. Connie Rose Porter was born in 1959 and grew up in Lackawanna, New York, in the Barker Housing Project as the seventh of 10 children. As a teen, she was deeply interested in Black authors, and she kind of started writing around that time. Connie has written 2 adult novels called Albright Court and then Amani All Mine. Albright Court is set in a colorfully painted but crumbling housing project near Buffalo, New York, which traces like 2 decades in the lives of its project residents. Also, Albright Court, her debut novel, was selected by the American Library Association as one of the best books of 1991, which is super interesting. I've never heard of the book. Like, I definitely need to read it next. For Porter's writing for Addie, it stated that she did extensive research about the area, including going on a trip with the company representatives to Philadelphia. She also refused to negotiate on the central discussion of enslavement. Porter was one of the ones who argued for the use of a historical Black dialect. For Porter, quote, Meet Addie was one of the most difficult books in the series to write because there was so much to accomplish. Not only did it have to introduce Addie and her family, but it also had to introduce slavery and then set the initial plot line for 6 books. And I had to keep in mind that the Pleasant Company had multiple tie-ins. There were books, but some of the products being created were also featured for the clothes, the accessories, and the furniture. So that's like quite an intense writing feat to put in like literally 50 pages, but somehow she managed to do it. Once the books were written, Porter also actively and eagerly traveled across the country promoting the books at releases and appearing at book signings. Low-key, you don't know what I would do for a signed copy of Meet Addie. Like, you don't know how far I would go for a signed copy of one of these books. And then the series itself has sold more than 3 million copies total since its 31st anniversary. Currently, Connie Porter lives in North Carolina, where the books actually take place. It really does feel like this writer put so much effort and love into the series, and it sucks to see that people are being so critical online when they haven't even like read the books. Like, I think that they just take Addie as like the face and they don't even like look into what the story means. They're just like, nah, I don't want a slave doll. And it's like, okay, well, there's more than that. There's more than that. There's some nuance. Porter states, quote, when I look back at the life of Addy these past 30 years, sometimes I wonder if there were too many expectations placed on the slender shoulders of one 9-year-old character. The experience of one character, the story of one character, could not represent the millions of stories of enslaved people whose names rung as clear as the bells inside the families who loved them, but have fallen silent and been lost to time. Given the attempt of some politicians, some groups who want to trivialize the importance of African American history or to erase it completely, I feel now more than ever that African Americans should embrace our history, and so should all of America. All of it. It holds no shame for me. Our lives, culture, history, gifts, skills, and talents did not begin here. The stories about Addy are about one child. I know that some may not want to hear her story, to talk about the untold millions of stories of enslaved people. Even some African Americans feel this way. I can honestly say I understand it. I get the weariness, but I feel I am no more weary than the earliest relative we had been able to trace in our family, Hannah Dunn, who was born a slave in 1850 in Alabama. The irony is that she would have been a contemporary of Addy, and she was my mother's grandmother. If I can speak with love and reverence of my mother to my daughter, I can speak of the love and reverence my mother had for her grandmother, a woman she never knew. And I can speak of Addy. We can all speak of Addy. For the past 30 years, we have heard her voice, seen her face. Her story has risen from the dust, has brought me, bringing her readers full circle to meet an ancestor. End quote. And what more could I say? That's a beautiful paragraph. Like, she's right. And in some ways, a lot of people in the African American community did embrace Addy. I think they saw a face and felt a spirit. Through Porter's words, they heard a voice that spoke to them, and I can attest to that. I also think that what really helped this book, besides just the words, were the brilliant illustrations of Melody Benson Rosales. I want to talk about her because I can't really talk about the book series without her, because she kind of put the image of what Addy looked like and who she was in the story. So, who is Melody Rosales? She's the book's illustrator, and she's really important in the narrative as she kind of creates the tone for the book. In a lot of American Girl books, not just Addy, they kind of have this like little section of a family tree that I want to show you. Okay, so you basically get a chance to see every single character and what they should look like, kind of. And pay attention to just like how many skin tones you see for Black people. It's not just like one skin tone. And then as you go further in the book, there are illustrations on almost every page, whether it's like illustrations of like food, which is common, or they'll have just like illustrations of what's happening in the book. Like, they're always there, and I think they're there also just to help children kind of get their imaginations going. This is from her website. Melody Benson Rosales states that she's an artist, a curator, a digital designer, an illustrator, an author, sculptor, and doll creator. She's a biracial artist raised in Black American culture, and she's devoted her life working with children, adolescents, and adults to creatively influence their ideas, values, and opinions found nestled deep within the multi-layered history of the African diaspora. She's also studied at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and Columbia College, as well as spending time as an author and illustrator in residence at the Jakarta International Schools in Indonesia. Rosales kind of modeled Addy off of her young daughter at the time, and kind of using some of the drafts that the Pleasant Company and the advisory board had given her. And it's important to note, though, that Melody has some big discrepancies with the Pleasant Company, and I think this is important to note talking about the creation of Addy. So, quote, she described her relationship with the Pleasant Company as fraught from the beginning. As she recalls it, when she was flown out to the American Girl headquarters in Middleton, Wisconsin, for a tour and a meeting with several of the American Girl employees, she did not see a single person of color working there, and that's probably true. Also, according to Rosales, at least one employee she met at the company was taken aback by her appearance. When she arrived, and she was asked if she was black since Rosales is biracial, and her impression was that the person had expected someone with darker skin. Rosales also described kind of constant battles with Roland and the art team over the style and historical accuracy of her illustrations. One such disagreement that seems to kind of keep coming up was over Rosales' depiction of the complexions of black characters. According to Rosales, the Pleasant Company was kind of afraid of wading into the complexities and politics of light and dark skin, but Rosales was really passionate about this, that they thought about it a lot. Rosales was eventually fired by the company and sent a termination letter, as well as being asked to return the Addy prototype they had given her, which, yeah. So she really only illustrated book 1 through 3 or 4. Those 1 to 3 books basically like were a big part of the illustrations of Addy. Like you kind of like book 1, kids are seeing what she looks like, right? So if you fire the illustrator, it's kind of like, well, who are you gonna have to replace it? Is it gonna be another black woman? No. Instead, Dal Taylor, a white male illustrator, took on the final 3 books in the original series. To me, honestly, it seemed like he mainly just copied Rosales' style, but also many of his illustrations made characters look very different. Like he wasn't very consistent on keeping them the same skin tone. He would also change their facial features and something. Like he was never consistent with what they looked like. I mean, he was just doing a job, and I get that, but Addy, and I remember this as a kid, the books that he took on to illustrate, Addy looks different. Her friends look different. Like, it just seems like he was ignorant to what black people look like, and he just decided, well, I'll just draw them differently each time, and children won't notice. But children do notice. Like, if take for instance this picture, right? This is kind of what Addy looks like. This is what her dad looks like. Okay, take note of this. This is what her dad looks like, right? I'm gonna go to book. I'm gonna go to this other book so you can see what he drew her dad to be. What? This is her dad. Now, is that the same dad in book 1? Tell me that, because I don't think it is. That is not the same. It's not the same man. And I remember as a kid reading this and being like, that is not the same person. Like, what happened? I am side-eyeing the Pleasant Company for that. And I think this is kind of like a key puzzle piece. Why would a company who cared about the sensitive nature of Addy then hire a white man to replace a black woman's illustrations? It's just not adding up. Like, why would we do that? Why would, huh? Melody, I think, really cared about how black people can look different, and she rightfully so fought hard to maintain that right. It seems that the Pleasant Company thought Melody's illustration showed too many varieties in skin tone, but we as black people do vary in skin tone, shape, and hair texture, yet the lighter we are, the more desirable and better we're treated. The less kinky and straighter our hair resembles, the more compliments we receive, even in our own communities. And I do think that's important to remember. The Pleasant Company sadly just wasn't ready to think that way, even if the story indirectly mentioned these themes. Pleasant Company wanted the illustrations to be one note, and Melody really fought against that. And I think that that's strong. I mean, on this channel, I've talked about that multiple times, and it sucks that she fought hard and then was fired. Like, I don't feel like that's fair, and I really wish her all the best. And I think that her illustrations were beautiful and really did set the tone for the story. I want to focus now on why this doll was being made and for who. While I happened to be a black girl who had an Addy doll in the early 2000s, that was not as common. Most of the dolls were bought by white and wealthy clientele. Roland stated that the company expected to sell 750,000 Addy dolls by the end of 1993, and that the majority of dolls would be bought by white clientele. She states that she believed that this would make a major difference in attitudes about race. And while it does seem like Addy was made with good intentions, and the creators of Addy, like Connie Porter and Melody Rosales, did take care of her, in some ways there were some missteps. Like, yes, it's great and admirable that they decided to make the doll and hire black writers and illustrators. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. And I do think that Addy is a great way to introduce young children to what happened with slavery and the struggles that even freed people and black Americans faced. Yet, when we talk about the final product in terms of who's buying the dolls and why, there's a lot of gray area with allowing white girls to purchase this expensive black enslaved doll, and it feels a little icky considering there's a deep history with dolls, specifically black dolls in America. I mean, when is there not a deep history? We got to talk about dolls and their history in American culture because I think that's important to talk about. And you know, I want to not just say not just American culture because there's a history of racism with dolls literally all over the world. I want to say that this part it gets a little intense. So if you want to skip ahead, you're more than welcome to. I understand. I just wanted to pre-warn you. Girls and dolls have had a long, tangible history of criticism and making girls feel various ways about how they're supposed to be represented in society. There's Barbies, Raggedy Ann, Bratz, LOL dolls, I mean, you name it, and they all come with their own criticisms. Yet, there's even a more sinister meaning with black dolls in the American landscape. America has had a long history of manufacturing black dolls with racist caricatures. Many of them have characters such as pickaninnies and sambos, mammies, gollywogs, all marketed at white children. These racist caricatures spread hateful stereotypes, and sometimes they would even spread like an idealized idea of plantation life. This is really important to keep mindful of. And in a lot of the ways, these dolls had very like racist caricatures. So their skin was painted almost like black, like with black paint, or their lips were very oversized and red, or their hair was like kind of looked like a joke. Like they would do things like that just to kind of spread that same misuse. And as we know, like learning and growing for children and playing with toys really does develop what they think about in the future and how they think about ideas and people. And it was a big way in which I think a lot of propaganda got spread around. They would give white children like black caricature dolls and then tell them to beat them up or do things to them, or children would start getting the idea that they owned this doll, they owned black people. Robert Bernstein describes the popularity of pickaninny dolls with white children in the 19th and 20th centuries. They had a passionate love for a black doll, which was often kind of couched in violence. Quote, white children often mutilized their black dolls, gashing their throats, cutting between their legs, and even hanging or burning them. Love and violence were not mutually exclusive, but were instead interdependent. Although children often commit violence against dolls, 19th century white children singled out black dolls for attacks that were especially vicious and that took on racialized forms. This is no coincidence, end quote. Yeah, like that was a real thing. And I mean, white children were going to be purchasing Addie. How are they going to be treating her? And how does that really affect the psyche of that child with how they treat black people as they grow up and get older? Now, I'm not saying every white child that had an Addie doll would have done that. I knew plenty of white girls who had Addie dolls, and they were very kind and appreciative to them. Even if we feel that Addie is not that, I want to show why some people had some uncomfortable feelings towards Addie and this doll that was taking place in enslavement. Now we've talked about like this context of black dolls in the past and their racist kind of caricature history. But there was also other things that kind of plagued Addie, and there were other negative aspects. Alicia Harris states from a Slate article, she says, I've had my own difficulties wrestling with how Addie made me feel as a child. A lot of these feelings were rooted not in disdain for Addie herself, but for the clear-cut lack of choice. While my white peers could pick from any number of varied characters made in their likeness, I could not. End quote. Another problem that came with Addie was the fact that she was literally the only black doll. Maybe there's just a black girl who doesn't want to choose from the enslaved doll. Maybe she just wants a different doll. Like, I think that's valid. It's hard when that's your only point of representation, right? Like, this is why representation is such an important word, because you need nuance. It's great to have Addie as a doll, right? But that shouldn't be the only choice. Your only choice is Addie. You don't get anything else. I mean, that leaves you nothing. What hurt the most as a child with an Addie doll was just how white children and white parents often dismissed her. Most of the time, Addie was picked last at fellow friends' sleepovers, or when we would be talking about our favorite American Girl dolls. Addie, for me, white people came with like this sense of shame. Many of my friends would kind of make excuses like, oh, well, you know, like Addie is cool and all, but she's black and I'm not, so why would I get her? Or they'd be like, yeah, I mean, she's cool, but like her hair is really nappy. That one hurt. I'm gonna say that one hurt. Or they'd be like, yeah, well, she just kind of makes me feel bad, so I didn't want to get her. Britt Bennett from the Paris Review states, quote, for 17 years, Addie was the only black historical doll. She was the only non-white doll until 1998. If you were a white girl who wanted a historical doll who looked like you could imagine yourself in Samantha's Victorian home, or with Kirsten weathering life on the prairie. If you were a black girl, you could only picture yourself as a runaway slave. And for me, it kind of seemed ironic that most of my friends always had like the pick of any doll that looked like them. And while most of the time I never had that luxury, I never had that choice to not see myself in white people. Like, sure, maybe I didn't see myself, but it was like, you have to just choose. I never was like, oh, I have to play with something that's exactly like me. And I think that that's a privilege that a lot of white children get to have. I was just always willing to play with the dolls that looked nothing like me because society had told me that something that looked like me just wasn't relatable. It told me that white was relatable. And honestly, with Addie, I do believe that this is the Pleasant Company's fault. Like, they kind of failed Addie when it came to marketing and the cost. Like, the average American Girl at the time cost around $80 or so. And most of the commercials for the Pleasant Company featured a very specific targeted audience, and it often alienated girls who maybe would be interested in Addie, and it alienated girls who would be interested in another black doll. Addie was also already at a disadvantage, as Harris states, quote, Roland, owner of the Pleasant Company, had intended to include a non-white doll in the original lineup, but decided against it for commercial reasons. I felt that the company initially needed to get established financially before we could take the risk that may be inherent in presenting a doll via direct mail into the African American market. She told the Washington Post because typically, middle class black consumers do not purchase much from direct mail catalogs. Demographic experts were split over whether this is true, by the way. But in 1990, Pleasant Company posted nearly $50 million in sales, according to the 1991 Wall Street Journal profile. And it was around that time that they began developing Addie. And I do think that black middle class Americans would be more than happy to purchase an Addie doll if you cater to them. But it's the fact that you're saying that they're poor, they're not going to purchase things. Like, it's that same thing where it's like, we're still dealing with Hollywood saying like, oh, well, black audiences don't see movies. And that's just not true. Like, statistically, that's been proven as not true. But it's just this like racist, idealized language that just keeps being used over and over again as an excuse as to why you don't have diversity in your market. I know that this doll is for profit and like they can't just like give out free dolls, but it doesn't seem like the American Girl Doll Company ever really tried to even reach the black community. They just said, well, these dolls are too expensive and black people don't buy them, so we're just going to cater to white clientele.
You can even see this in the way that a lot of the dolls are marketed. Like, American Girl Doll definitely plays into like a tokenization of dolls. If usually a white doll is coming out, it will have a white girl. If Addie's coming out, it will only have a black girl. They never seem to like mix the dolls with everybody, and you can tell that there's like a lot of separation, which doesn't help girls who are playing, and it also doesn't help consumers want to buy that doll if it doesn't feel like they're an active audience that's being reached out to. You can see that in the 1991 catalogs, very like just a lack of diversity. And that does not change throughout the years. Like, you can continue to see just like no effort being made to target these dolls to other demographics.
Since 2013, a Change.com petition has gathered nearly 70 signatures demanding that the Pleasant Company discontinue Addie doll. Now, this is where we get a little controversial. They state that Addie and slavery was a vile, cruel, inhumane, unjust Holocaust of Black Americans. Why would this subject matter ever be considered entertaining? The petition accuses the Pleasant Company of diminishing the cruelty of slavery and instead glorifying it as to some adventurous fantasy. Britt states, I've never found Addie as insensitive as the petitioners do, but she does trouble me. She is a toy steeped in tragedy. And who is offered tragedy during play? Who gets the pink stores and tea parties, and who gets the worms? When I received an Addy doll for Christmas, I was innocent enough to believe that Santa had brought it to me, but mature enough to experience the horrors of slavery. End quote. I also agree with Britt. I don't know. I think that the change.org petition came from a lot of people who didn't know anything about Addie and just jumped to conclusions about the doll itself and just decided to say that. And I do believe that, yes, slavery was a vile and inhuman thing, but it happened and we can't just turn our eyes away from it. Like, we just can't. Now, I'm not saying I want to see blockbuster movies where they just like whip people all the time. Like, I'm not looking for 12 Years a Slave ever again. But I do think that we need to continue reading. We need to like tell children about it. Like, it needs to be important topic that we don't lose. However, I do think that there's positive aspects. I've talked about the story and how beautifully crafted it is. I talked about the illustrations. I talked about the fact that most of the people who created the doll itself and her image were Black historians. Like, this wasn't just something that they slapped together. To me, Addie is certainly not a pickaninny or a racist caricature, since we've seen how painstakingly Connie Porter and Melody Rosales and everyone on the advisory board worked to get her to be. I think if this doll had been created by only white people and they didn't care about her story and they didn't have any nuance, then I would have other things to say. But they really made a character that's fully dimensional, and I think that's important in the narrative of Addie. And yes, she was sold without the conversation of accessibility and the cost that honestly phased many Black households out. But for me, it's maybe that Addie parallels both the positive and the negative feelings that people imbue on her. But honestly, most things regarding Black history in America does. Even Barbie is complicated for Black girls. Like, there's not going to be one item that is 100% we're positive about, right? For many Black Americans, Addie is a doll that holds positive and different value. Representation, as mentioned before, to girls like me was extremely important. And there's just something so beautiful about seeing a doll made in your likeness. I think providing Black girls with dolls that they can see themselves in and relate to is one of the many essential ways to increase their confidence, enhance their pride in their race and culture. Vanessa Wilby states, quote, "I'm also not convinced that Addie's existence was a horrible mistake. Perhaps without Porter's words and skill, Addie Walker would have been nothing more than a half-hearted apology for the past, an effort rooted in good intentions and ending in failure. America's history should not be sanitized, cleaned up, and polished by a sense of oblivious nationalism, and Porter knew that. We could not have expected her to be some universal salve for racism's wounds. I can still feel grateful for Addie while recognizing this thorny complexity of her significance as a doll. Knowledge is truly power, and Addie imparted her doting child caretakers with knowledge and truth over willful ignorance about America's history. Although, yes, Addie is a fictional character, her background and racial identity do not make her a victim or a tragic heroine, but thoroughly and undoubtedly American." End quote. Therefore, Addie being the only Black doll for quite some time with a legacy of slavery weighing on her stories, while it made it hard, yes, I loved Addie, and I love what she stands for. Yes, I also had to be aware of the dark truth of America. My friends had the pleasure, or rather privilege, of looking away, and I did not. And I don't think that that's a fair thing to place on so many Black girls, but I also don't think that we should look away. Not looking away helped me really compartmentalize my identity and who I am. Dolls like Addie humanize slavery. Dolls like Addie humanize enslaved people. And getting her did help me understand my feelings. I carried her around and talked about her with pride because she was a story of survival and hope and even love despite what others thought. While, yes, like I mentioned, I don't want to see more films or TV shows involving enslaved people being brutally beaten or killed, I do believe there is room for more history and books to be taught on the topic. In America, we are in a literacy and education crisis. We've seen a decline in people caring about actual history. Addie, even though enslaved, was nuanced in her stories. I got to know about her hopes and dreams, the fact that she liked ice cream, and the fact that she had favorite clothes and personal belongings. Our enslaved ancestors had dreams, they had hopes, they had things they loved, they had things they didn't. And it's really important to view them in that way instead of just like putting this dark mark on them, right? I think that we view enslaved people as a monolith. We view them through intense pain. And while, yes, they absolutely suffered, we didn't show enslaved people's humanness. The big issue was for many years, Addie was the only Black representation in the American Girl lineup. And that was really ignorant on the Pleasant Company's part. So much controversy, sadness, history, exploitation, and expectation is placed on the small shoulders of a doll, just like how much we place on Black girls. Yet, in 2024, I don't think a doll like Addie could ever be created without stir. Addie and her story is pretty radical. For now, I just have to give a tiny bit of praise to the Pleasant Company. I will. I'll give you a little bit of praise for doing that at the time. And mainly, I have to give praise to the people like Connie Porter, Melody Rosales, and those on the advisory board who are willing to fight for a doll like Addie. Thank you. She matters just like all of you do.